Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be joining in from. It is Friday, and this is Chris Torrence with another episode of Semi-Related, hosted by Optum. Today we have another special guest. I say they're all special in their own way, but this is a gentleman that I've exchanged a few notes with in the past, and was very intrigued when I found out what he was working on. But I don't want to spoil that. I'm going to let Max Farrell over at WorkHound kind of give us a little more information on that and about himself. So welcome. How you doing today, Max?
Chris, life is nice. How are you, sir?
I think I mentioned off, hey, I am exhausted in a word. It is conference season, and I have been on a whirlwind, and I think I'm getting a little intermission break next week before I hit the road and back at it again. But hey, it is Friday, man, and everything seems to sound better on a Friday. So, Max,
Awesome.
are you sitting in Chattanooga today, man?
I am. I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm here at our office today.
Yeah, and are you born and raised in the volunteer state, or have you moved around a bit?
No, I'm from Arkansas originally. So from
Right.
Arkansas, lived in Iowa for a while. Came to Tennessee 8 years ago.
Okay.
So hopped around mid-sized cities.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to go. Well, there's Freight Alley, right? I guess based on we'll get into kind of what you're working on these days. But Max, I kind of like to start off, man. I look again. LinkedIn can tell its own story without a whole lot of deeper context. And I was
Yeah.
looking at some of your background. A lot of the folks we have on here have various levels of experience and exposure to the freight industry, from tech,
Mhm.
from asset trucking. We've had people on the freight tech side and brokerage, you name it, man. It's pretty all encompassing. But I don't think to date we've had anyone on this show that's kind of taken a little different approach with WorkHound. So, we can get it. Why don't you kind of give a little bit of history around how WorkHound started, and then maybe I'll take it back a little bit and how you kind of led up to this point where you started the organization. But for
Yeah.
those that are tuning in that may not know WorkHound, can you give us kind of the high level overview for people that would be interested to learn more at some point?
Yeah, for sure. So, WorkHound is a company we started in 2015, and we are an employee engagement platform for frontline and distributed workers. And so our goal is to help companies build better workplaces. So, if you think about industries like trucking, there's a really high turnover rate. A lot of guys quit because they don't feel respected, they don't feel like they have a voice. Historically, the only option for that voice had been exit interviews or annual surveys, and so we said, you got to be proactive instead of reactive. And so what we did at WorkHound was create a real time feedback loop between the workforce and the company to understand their issues in real time so you can catch issues quickly. Because a guy can be happy on Tuesday, fed up on Wednesday, and quit by the end of the week and have a job elsewhere the next week because it's that volatile out there. And so for us, we're really good at helping companies get a pulse on their people, understand the trends and issues, communicate back to them, and close the feedback loop so that they're able to retain more people, improve their operations, and ultimately build a better workplace.
Awesome. I'm always a believer in the phrase that feedback is a gift. I think some people be careful what you wish for, right? Sometimes, but
Yeah.
this idea, I think, since the proliferation of various apps in the smartphones, et cetera, we've got some, a couple other organizations and startups, et cetera, that have started this notion around how do we enable this crowdsource aggregation of feedback. But I don't think, Max, and keep me honest here, has anyone ever really made it very niche specific into like a certain industry, like trucking, and maybe with WorkHound, was that the genesis of this idea when you started? Was it kind of predicated on some of those other, review type or platforms and applications that you said, yeah, but they're missing a critical piece, at least in this industry, of reaching those frontline workers, whether it's again warehouse, the
Yeah.
distribution, the drivers. Did you see a void that you look to fill?
So of course, like you always want to find the blue ocean as much as possible when
Yeah.
you're starting something. But what we saw was that yeah, the frontline and distributed workforces were ignored compared to the knowledge workers. So there are hundreds of tools out there that focus on getting feedback. And honestly, getting feedback's a commodity. It's easy. The hard thing is understanding that data and doing something with it. And then who you do it for is also a very different experience. So, like if you think about knowledge workers, they're seeking very different things than somebody that's like a driver or a warehouse worker. Like if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Oh yeah.
a lot of companies are that have knowledge workers. They're trying to get to self actualization, but with companies that have frontline workers, often you're at the bottom tier of the hierarchy of just how do we provide security and stability for our people so that then we can start working our way up. And so for us, we work with a lot of the companies that are going from not giving a damn about their people to saying, okay, how do we start to create a culture of curiosity? And that's when we raise our hand and say, step one, just listen to your people.
Yeah.
Step two, act on what they say. And step three, tell them what you did. Good things will happen.
I like how you phrase that up. When was the moment when I know you said you guys have been around for, a few years now, quite a few
Yeah.
years. How did you kind of get started on this, Max? I mean, it's again, it's the idea is great, right? But you got to
Yeah.
figure out at that point, then it has to become a business plan. How do we monetize this? I assume. But at its premise, I love the concept. But how did you kind of, and what made you think? Do you have a previous background in this space, or what made you kind of say this is the vertical or the industry that I want to go into?
Yeah. I don't look like I came from trucking.
Well,
I,
yeah, maybe me neither, probably, but that would be far from the truth. I've been around for a minute, but yeah,
Yeah. So my background is sociology, and so I've
yeah,
always loved solving people problems. And so I was fortunate. I was working at a tech startup in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was really excited about the work we were doing. I was disrupting an industry. There was a ton of purpose. I was excited, but then I'd see people walking around that worked at these insurance companies nearby that were like disengaged at their work, and I was like, why aren't people as excited as I am? And realized there was an opportunity to create entrepreneurs inside
hmm
big companies. So I quit my job and started a corporate innovation consulting company focused on how do you run workshops to create an entrepreneurial spirit inside larger organizations. But I realized I was selling a vitamin, and I
yeah,
really wanted to solve a painkiller problem. And I remember talking to a mentor and saying, like, where should I be focusing? Like, everybody could use our services. He's like, go focus where there's pain. And he told me about the challenges in trucking, where there's a 95% driver turnover rate, there's a shortage. The next generation of drivers, we're not sure where it comes from. And as I started to dig in there, I realized there's not only an opportunity in trucking, there's opportunity for all these different frontline and distributed workforces out there. And so there's a reason we're called WorkHound and not Truckhound, because we knew that if we are able to do our job well in a beachhead and continue to expand, like, we can go create value for companies that are wanting to create that culture of curiosity that's been missing from their organization.
yeah. And feedback's a two-way street. So when you're starting up a new endeavor, right? There's always going to be folks that may be completely supportive, some that may, be not quite that supportive or start poking holes in it. What are some of the early things that you learn when rolling out WorkHound? It looks like back in 2015
Yeah,
ish. Now obviously we're almost 10 years in the making now.
right.
So relative to when you started, what was the good, the bad, and the ugly that you learned back in the early days versus kind of what you see today? How has that evolved over the years?
I
Any
feel
any
like
major takeaways? I'm sure. How much time do we have is probably your answer,
yeah, it's
right?
like I feel like I need something different in my cup if we're going to talk about that. So one of the things, like, our one of our mantras at our company is win or learn, and there are days where we do a ton of learning, and we've certainly done that over the past 9 years. But I think that the key thing is that we have to create value. And early on, our big focus was, let's fall in love with solving the problem instead of like the solution that's in my head, because what's in my head does not matter. It's what matters is, are we helping companies win, and is it helping them win enough to where they're willing to pay us?
Right.
Which sounds simple, but oftentimes you can go build a thing and say, why didn't anybody like this? It means you built the wrong way. But we've learned a ton around, like, how do you show ROI? How do you strike a balance with a company of giving feedback in a way that they can digest it? Because if you're just giving negative feedback all the time, like, people shut down. And unfortunately, when companies are going from not ever having feedback to starting, like, you're changing the habits of the people inside that organization. And so we have to give a little bit of a mix of both positive and negative feedback. And so what we found is that in the feedback we get from WorkHound, it's like 30% of the feedback's positive. So I think one of the biggest fears that we have in talking to potential partners is this just going to be a complaint fest? And the short answer is no. Like, people have a lot of good things to say, but you do have to create that avenue for them to say it. Um, and we've learned a ton about how do we attract companies, how do we hold on to them, how do we grow a team. We've learned a lot, so we could go any different direction there.
Yeah, humans are interesting, right? I always feel like there's this natural, there's an inclination here when, whether it's a Yelp review or a Glassdoor, right? G2, there's
Yeah.
quite a few. again, not specifically what WorkHound's doing. Humans have a tendency, at least, and maybe I'm wrong here, you're the expert. When we have a good experience, it's almost like psychologically, well, that was the expectation. And rarely do we kind of go the extra mile. And I really do, to say, hey, that was, a restaurant. That was amazing service.
Yeah,
And you can apply that to anything in life, right? But when we have a bad or less than ideal experience, man, do we really look forward to ripping someone a new one out on a social platform in
yeah,
hopes it's a venting session, if nothing else. So
for
you
sure.
mentioned 30% of the feedback channel is pretty positive, which actually surprises me. I thought it'd be much lower just based on my earlier comments.
Yeah.
So do you think that, have you learned, again, that's kind of a psychological game? And how do you kind of, when you're out engaging with the knowledge base, the leadership of companies you want to work with, do they have that same assumption? Well, this is just going to be, let the complaints roll in. This is not indicative. This is just the one bad apple or the one frustrated driver that didn't get home that week. And how do you kind of navigate that conversation when you're talking to people to make sure that they don't just walk away with, I'm not looking to get a complaint fest documented on a public
Right.
forum?
So I think one of the biggest ahas we've had over the past couple of years is that you have to digest feedback in two different layers inside the business. You have to digest it at the grassroots level, which is how do we do the things to make sure the straw doesn't break the camel's back and somebody doesn't leave our company unnecessarily. And that requires its own set of tactics and approaches. But then the other piece that we've really unlocked in the past couple of years is the strategic level of feedback, which is what are some of the trends or miscommunications that exist in our business that we just had a blind spot on. Like one of the things I think we've been really good at WorkHound is we will help you catch the things you didn't even know to ask about. Because your traditional survey has bias. It's management saying we think we know what the issues are, but you got blinders on. And oftentimes you don't even know what question to ask. And so we've been really good at surfacing the micro issues that can lead to a macro change. But it does take adjusting the mindset of leaders to embrace all types of feedback and understand where to focus versus focus less, and realize this is a continuous improvement thing versus a one-time snapshot.
Max, is this again, we didn't really talk about this earlier, but kind of give us a little bit more context and color around the WorkHound platform itself. How is this being utilized? I mean, again, we can start wherever you want, but
Yeah.
again, I assume there's a platform or an app, a mobile app, or I'll let you kind of answer that question in more depth.
So when the way we built WorkHound was we wanted to make it super easy for everyone. Again, we initially started serving trucking companies, and everyone is busy there. There are fires that pop up all the time there, and so we had to make it easy for the people inside the office, but also easy for the folks that are on the front lines. Like if you take a driver, they're busy. Oftentimes, you're dealing with folks that may be 20, they may be in late 60s, 70s. And so where we landed was we needed to build something that everyone could use, which is text. So we don't have an app. There's no downloading or installing. It's really low friction. We send a text message to workers at some frequency. Most companies, it's weekly, and prompt them to share feedback with their company. And so it may say, tap the link to tell us how work is going at Truckco. Your anonymous feedback helps. Sometimes it's a more specific question. And then they click a link, and in 90 seconds, they share, here's how I feel. Here's why I feel that way. And then they're done. And what we're able to do with that data is we have machine learning and AI that's identifying what are the keywords, what's the sentiment, where is this comment happening inside the organization, so that in real time a company can go in and see like what's the pulse of our people, what are the trends, what are the issues, what are the miscommunications, where are challenges happening in our business. And that's when they start to attack that feedback at two different layers. Like, what are the things we need to address in order to improve communication with somebody or make sure that this person doesn't leave unnecessarily? So, for example, we may get feedback that a worker says, you said my wife would be on my insurance. She's not. I'm tired of the runaround. I'm going to quit. And that's a fixable issue. And so we built a few ways for companies to address that. So first off, all the feedback that comes in through WorkHound is anonymous unless a worker reveals their identity, because the fear of retaliation exists in a lot of these frontline workforces. And so the company can request to reveal a worker's identity. And then that worker has the power to say, yep, tell them who I am, or no, I want to stay anonymous. But even if that's the case, they can still do one-way or two-way anonymous messaging. So one of the things I think that's really unique about WorkHound is that you can take action on every single piece of feedback that comes in. So even if somebody says that insurance comment and doesn't reveal their identity, the company can still send them start an anonymous chat to say, hey, we don't know who you are. Let's work through this issue. Did you look at this detail on your benefits? And so we actually help workers resolve issues where that's actually happened at a company, and the company got connected with this person. Turns out there was just a miscommunication about paperwork, and the
Right.
person wound up staying. And that's a meaningful impact because the cost to replace somebody like that's like $5,000 to $8,000. And so if companies are rolling up their sleeves and addressing some of these issues, they're getting meaningful savings in their business just by being proactive. And so our success rate is 88% of the time we're able to help a company retain
Awesome.
those at-risk workers, and so at least 30 days after the issue's addressed. And so that's a win. And so if we
You
can
bet.
create those sorts of conversations, it makes the organization better, and then also has people like feel more aligned because they're being heard.
I think that last sentence, right? We just want to all be heard, right?
For sure.
I like the anonymity. I think I've been a part of surveys in the past, and I think there's always been a mistrust or distrust around being able to really, I put my name to it out of fear of,
Yeah.
like you said, retribution,
Yeah.
retaliation. That's real, and I think I think that's been the apprehension for most people. So I like the fact that it's optional, but I think that I would imagine. Do you think that do you find that more people, and I'm just
Yeah.
relative to work count, are they more willing to kind of put their name to it, or do you find more the anonymous approach is more favored, if you will?
So our default is anonymous. So I would say mostly it's anonymous feedback, but what I think has been helpful for companies is getting over this, like, I need to know who it is,
Yeah,
and evolving their thinking to, this is an anonymous comment. I'm appreciative that it was shared here versus Glassdoor or forums or Facebook,
right.
and now let's figure out what to do with it, because like this person cared enough to share, we should care enough to digest it, receive it, and figure out how to respond to it.
You raise a good dynamic when you talk about Glassdoor, which is pretty public. And I think with word count, Max, is it safe to say that this is more of a privatized feedback loop that's very relative just to that organization that you're working with versus putting people out in the ether for everybody to see, where it becomes quickly can be a runaway train, and
Right.
we've all seen it, right? So just for those listening that may be in more white collar leadership roles that are saying, hey, I just don't want to have my dirty laundry aired out in a public forum on the internet,
Yeah.
are you saying, hey, no, just to be clear, this is very much centralized into your organization only, and we do not share the feedback or the data, at least not, unless it's and we'll let you talk about that. Maybe there's value to saying, hey, we've actually gotten, maybe we still keep it anonymous, but we're seeing at aggregate across your customer base, there are trends that are impacting, every frontline worker that you all need to be made aware of. How do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, so first off, like our big focus is we want you to be able to control the message inside your organization. And so the feedback is between the workforce and the company that they're working with, so that they can understand whose issues do we need to address, and what are the broader issues inside our business that we need to fix. But also, again, we get a bunch of positive feedback, so we figure out what are the things we're doing well that we need to double down on. Because the reality of a lot of the workforces that we work with, they are their harshest critic. And so they're always trying to fix what's broken instead of celebrating what's working well. And there's a lot of things we need to know. Okay, let's keep doing this thing that people are really happy about. So that's an important thing that we have to emphasize. But to your point, we do identify what are the aggregate trends across all of the workers sharing feedback on our platform, to share with our customers and the broader market. What story is this telling out there? Our companies are very curious, how does their feedback compare to their peers? So we do some benchmarking, but then also broadly, like, what are we seeing out there? Like, it's been really helpful over the years as we've navigated just like unprecedented crises like COVID. We were able to have insights about what are these guys that are on the front lines away from their office, or the really thinking on the road. And we were able to help companies be proactive in equipping their people better, because they were getting these insights that they couldn't get. And so we always aim to do that, is have this really unique data set that others just don't have.
Yeah. You mentioned, I mean, again, as if you're just a CFO type, numerics, financial minded. I like how you put some metrics about the opportunity costs associated the average cost. And again, I think, you rounded out some numbers. I think with drivers, I hear often from the larger fleets that
Mhm.
total cost to hire, train, and retain is around that $10,000-12,000 per driver. And then to
Right.
see attrition where it is, to me, it's just like, it's so backwards. And so I think,
Right.
again, I'm hopeful that your narrative kind of helps quantify, hey, look, if you go in and see the fact that these people don't feel appreciated, they don't feel like their thoughts and ideas, suggestions, all the above are taken seriously, there's a correlation of, and you
Yeah.
can quantify this, it's probably a pretty significant amount. So have you, and it may be, and again, over the course of this journey, have you been able to come up with some pretty cool stats that you share with your, whether it's active customers or potential ones that may, hey, I get it conceptually, but I'm a numbers guy.
Right.
Max, show me the money here. Show me what am I really, I'm sure that's been pretty enlightening for a lot of them.
Yeah, it is, and so I will say retention is one of the toughest metrics to measure against because there's so many variables that determine if that number goes up, down, or stays the same. And so as we tell our story, we work with our customers to identify a metric that WorkHound and the company creates value independent of everything else going on. And so that's often how many workers did we retain that had intervenable
Right.
issues. And so that's where we see that 88%, 90% success rate of companies being able to catch and address some of these issues over time. But I'd say the other thing that's really showed itself recently is being able to identify what are the opportunities for improvement that exist because you can catch one comment that can save you a several $100,000 lawsuit,
Yeah.
or realize you have a manager that's not great at a location that you need to go address this issue now before you risk mass exodus of a branch. And then other times it can be we need to go raise pay in this other market because our competitors just increased it. So the operational intelligence in itself can be really invaluable. And so we do work to quantify those sorts of things, but it really comes down to what is a company looking to learn? Like, so for us, the feedback that we try to provide a company, we want it to map towards their goals as an organization so that it's feedback that they can digest and do something about.
That's a good point too, Max. When you're starting down this path, commercials are fun. You got this new customer. Give us a color context and how does that look? Do you kind of, my assumption would be you sit down with maybe the knowledge base, the
Yeah.
leadership, and do you guys kind of work? Do you kind of share, hey, this is what other organizations are typically asking. Here's the way they ask it, the way it's phrased, and maybe there's some uniqueness to every organization. Do you sit down with them as kind of I'll call it an implementation of sorts and trying
Yeah, of
to
course.
derive those questions? Is that a pretty collaborative effort you guys have?
Yeah, it has to be
Yeah.
because the big question is like why are we here? Why are we making a commitment to listening now? And oftentimes it's retention, and we're totally good with that because companies will join for retention but stay for the insights. Other times it's they want to improve on communication. Sometimes it's that they want to figure out how do we maintain a direct working relationship with our people versus having a third party come manage that relationship because companies right now are very worried about unions. And so we see companies come, and then that's when we're able to say, let's set a goal, and then let's map to it over the next quarter because that helps us shape what we're looking to learn. Like typically when we get started, we highly encourage starting with open-ended feedback. Like let's have
Right.
your team surface the issues, and that may guide the kinds of questions that we ask in the future versus you immediately wanting to jump towards specific questions. But yeah, again, our goal is to serve the companies we partner with, and so it depends on what problem are they trying to solve and what are they looking to learn, and then we'll map to that.
Yeah, with the you mentioned the unions, and I think we've been a bit of a whirlwind lately. I was at an inland type conference earlier this week in Chicago, and all the news, the chatter was around the longshoremen, right? And here I am yesterday, everybody's, the panic buying's kicking in, and I think last I heard they've at least punted it till January. So I
Yeah.
call it the election year, call it get through the holidays. But part of me is like, was WorkHound involved with that? I wonder if that, could that have been the connector, and perhaps not. But it just goes to show the power of collective bargaining, and you wonder how often these when the meetings of the minds come from the unions and the folks trying to keep the operations going. What if if a work count had been offered to the longshoremen? I wonder if that if that would have helped kind of identify some of the key things. And I think it comes down to money a lot, right? And I think the automation piece
Yeah.
is the scary part for for anyone in the unions right now, longshoremen no exception. But just very, very appropriate and apt that you would bring up the unions at this particular week.
I mean, it's a it's a real thing that has to be considered out there. And the challenge with the union framework is that it was written like close to 100 years ago in the U.S. And the way business gets done now is exponentially faster. And so, like, even the way that the agreements are getting structured right now, where you're signing a multi-year agreement, like the way the world operates changes year to year, month to month, you could argue day to day. And so that's where, like, we see the benefit of real-time feedback is that you have to be more agile in understanding the needs of your workforce. We would talk to some companies that would say pride themselves on an annual survey. But if you think about the companies that did an annual survey in February of 2020, that data was completely invalid a month later because we had a pandemic on our hands.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with these long-term agreements. It's that, yes, you're setting up a partnership, but the dynamics of what the business needs call for in that time, or what the workforce needs call for, shift quickly. Because I've also seen it where a company's like, look, the union contract is this. I know the market moved a bunch, but this is what you guys signed up for a few years ago. So like we have to make it more agile in the future, and so that we certainly do our part by creating an approach for listening in a more agile fashion.
You mentioned COVID. I think it's no secret in this industry, right? We saw what can happen at historically speaking, like the biggest boom times I think I can ever recall in my 25 plus years in this space.
Yeah.
Now we've been riding on this deflationary freight recession, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Max, has the feedback loop changed considerably from the boom town of COVID versus this, falling off the cliff in the period we've been in lately? Have you seen any useful data points that would kind of maybe surprised you, or are they in line with what you would expect with market conditions? Any insights that you've learned from that?
For sure. We're certainly in a new reality, and I think that it took a moment for all of us to realize it, accept it, and then figure out how to work within it. And so you see that with companies where initially there was an apprehension to share bad news, and now there's just a reality of, like, we are in a challenging time. Our job is to create a resilient organization. These are the things we're doing. And here's the things that we know. Here's the things we don't know. Here's what we're looking to learn. So I'd say the most innovative organizations out there, just like putting it on the table, like, here's where we're at, versus trying to highlight what's not real. So you're seeing a shift in the communication to being a much more just honest approach, I'd say, for the companies that I really admire. And then as far as the dynamics, it's mapping to more realistic expectations, because I think that's one of the biggest frustrations we see in the feedback is somebody saying, I was promised this, I was promised that. And now we're in a world where it's like, let's just try to keep it real with people, and make sure we're doing our part to take care of them and weathering the storm together. And so for companies, I think the best thing they can do is just keep saying, again, here's what we're trying to figure out in our business. Here's the wins that we're having. And here's where you can win more. Like, you can take on this additional work, or you can move to this lane. It's a time of resiliency.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to hear a lot. And we've heard it in the past, and resilient organizations are the one that ultimately, I think, survive, if not thrive.
Right.
I had an old boss one day, years ago, and he said, unlike fine wine, bad news never gets better with age, right? And I think, again, it goes back to, humans are kind of, there's good. Maybe it's the anonymity, right? When you feel like the spotlight's on you and you have this opportunity, the microphone's there, and people are like, I want to say this so bad, but again, I fear that there may be some kind of retaliatory actions that may be used against me. And so I think that, when you talk, Max, about is there a legal and an HR aspect that you have to be careful of with this? Because, I know some platforms, people are getting called out by name, and it gets ugly. So have you been able to kind of, like, we just certainly don't want to go down any kind of, put ourselves in a slippery slope position here by enabling people to overshare too much that shouldn't even be out there. But again, I'm kind of going back and forth in my head. If it's all privatized to the same organization, I guess it's not really getting out too far. But how do you deal with, was that something that leadership is like, hey, we certainly don't want to put ourselves in a liability situation here where somebody says something and then someone on the other side, maybe at the knowledge base, is saying, hey, you can get tensions rising quickly, and
Right.
maybe I just want to understand the platform. Is that communication thread always been captured? Is it a singular, the feedback loop? Is it a singular? You mentioned the text, they respond survey style or otherwise, and then or is it you see a thread of an audit trail of back and forth of those conversations? How does that work?
Yeah, so we do document.
Okay.
We it's cheap to host things, so
Yeah.
we haven't seen a reason to remove it. And so yeah, we do document that information just so companies can go back and see historical record, like what are the trends, what are the issues, how have we addressed issues in the past, so we can learn from it. But in regards to the thing around the HR legal concern, these issues are going to happen somewhere.
Right.
Like they can either happen where you're getting a heads up on them, or you can get blindsided by them. But they are going to happen. It's kind of like feedback. It is going to go somewhere. It just depends on, as a company, do you want to get surprised, or do you want to have a little bit of a heads up? And so you're seeing that where companies are making a fork in the road choice right now. Do we want to be proactive in maintaining a direct labor relationship with our people, or do we want to get surprised by a union vote?
Right.
Do we want to get ahead of potential issues that exist in a certain location, or do we want to get surprised by a lawsuit? So the what we find ourselves aligning with companies that say, hey, we're committed to proactive communication and having this culture of listening and addressing the issues inside our business. And there are companies that don't do that, and that's okay. Like everybody has a strategy, but really you see companies right now picking a lane. How do we want to operate our business?
Well, that whole preemptive or proactive versus reactive, I think you nailed it. If I'm in your shoes, I'm going, do we really want to wait till everything comes to a head and it's too late to go back? Wouldn't it be better to have real time information coming in on a regular basis so we can get
Yeah.
ahead of it? So I like to think that more management leadership teams are taking the fork in the road that is way more in favor of let's get ahead of this. Let's hear what's going on the front lines, and if
Yeah.
anything, for our own edification of those in the ivory tower, being I would want to know. I think that and hopefully that, and you could probably elaborate on this, Max. But when you see something starting to a trend that's starting to potentially
Mhm.
boil over, I'm guessing that there's enough at that point that there's a compelling enough issue that the leadership would then maybe organize I say all hands is the tech term, but
Yeah.
some kind of broader team discussion so they can take it from from a texting an application and say, let's just get out there in a face-to-face environment and
Mhm.
have more of a town hall discussion. Do you see a lot of organizations kind of that it evolves into that and they just take this data, so it's not going in there, what do you want to talk about? It's, hey, we asked for feedback, you gave it to us,
Yeah.
good, bad, and ugly. Is that action item then again to say, hey, let's all get together and let's talk through this again? And I say a town hall forum
Right. Of
style
course.
type scenario. Do you see that happen a lot? Just to take that extra step of, it's not just data for us. We really want to show that we heard you,
Hmm.
and even take it a step further and say, here's what we're going to do about it. Is
Yeah.
that often what yields at the end of this?
I would say that the companies that are most successful partnering with us definitely do that, where it's,
Yeah.
they digest it. They say, what are the things that we can do versus not? But regardless, we should communicate, because if you can't take action, you can at least show empathy. And the way
Right.
you show that is in a bunch of different ways. You can show it in like in person. You can do it through communication, but being able to physically be there and say, hey, here's what we heard, here's what we're looking into. You all wanted here's what we're hearing in the rumor mill. We just want to squash this and get on the same page. Like being front and center, I think is critical to companies being successful right now. So yeah, it is a matter of like, let's take this feedback, let's internalize it as a leadership team and then a management team. Like one of the things, there's one company we partner with. They say, look, each division has to tell us what's one thing you're going to do to improve retention in this company, and we're tracking
Nice.
to that. And the feedback helps balance, like, are we on track with the goal that this group set, so that everyone is responsible in making the team better, but we do have that directly responsible individual that's making sure accountability is happening across the board.
And this could also be, and again, I look at frontline workers. Let's look at it like a facility level, right? We talk
Yeah.
about drivers, great. They're usually all over. when you get down to kind of a location, a facility, a distribution center, a production facility, I'm guessing this all
Yeah.
falls within that realm. Do you notice, Max, there's trends of, and this is if I'm a leader,
Yeah.
I often think of, hey, I want to know how all my various facilities or my, these locations that I'm working with or I'm responsible for. Do you see that there's oftentimes, and maybe it's a mixed bag answer, I'm guessing, but you might have 10 facilities, we'll keep it easy.
Right.
8 or 9 of them are doing really well, but do you
Yeah.
also able to surface and extract, hey, there's one facility that you may want to go visit
For
because
sure.
it's going way off the deep end relative to where everybody else in the organization is kind of at versus this
Yeah.
one location. Maybe there's a need to go talk to the leadership at that particular facility. Do you see that happen a lot? And that, again, I think it's all data, right? So again, if I'm a leader, I want to know that and then be able to
Yeah.
take action and not realize I need to make it a blanket statement because I've got data saying, hey, these organizations, the vast majority, things are on
Mhm.
the up and up, but there's that one. Maybe it's a time for a leadership change or whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Do you see that happen a lot, or do you see it more across the board, or a bit of a mixed bag again?
So there's always opportunity for improvement, and we've certainly seen that
Yeah,
at companies where, like, there's one in particular. I remember they noticed that the satisfaction score of a location in Florida was significantly lower than the rest of the organization, and they started to dig into the feedback and see it was a lot of personnel related
yeah,
comments, and so they actually brought the manager of that location to their HQ and said, hey, let's sit down and let's look at this together. And of course, the manager immediately went like this and is just
yeah.
discounting. Ah, they don't get it. But perception is reality, and so they were able to have
Yes,
that soft skills conversation, and the manager turned it around. The satisfaction scores went up. Sometimes it means that somebody's not cut out for running that particular division, or there's just like larger trends happening inside a particular location. But at least you have data, because for a lot of organizations, the only data set you have of how a location is performing is like your revenue numbers or your
yeah,
retention numbers. But there are companies that partner with us strictly because they gather the nuclear insights. It's the handful
right.
of comments that come in from a certain location where it's like, everything sounds good, but now they're talking about seniority or favoritism. Like some of those keywords, it's like, we're not hearing this anywhere else in our data set. We should pay attention to a few things happening here. Let's go plan a visit.
I was thinking of what else you could do. I mean, this is data. There's just so much you can do. It's so telling.
For sure.
Do you see organizations that say, hey, we're thinking about implementing a change, or there's, for better or worse, there could be some news coming down the pike that's
Mhm.
going to have an impact?
Yeah.
Do you think this is also an ability for organizations to kind of get a litmus test before they follow through on a big strategic initiative to say, and I don't know, and that could be a myriad of things, but
Yeah.
does it also serve as kind of a pulse check before we, a strategic initiative that we, as the leadership team, we on the surface, we're like, this makes sense,
Yeah.
but we never really got that feedback from that operational frontline folks to kind of get their feedback. Do you think, is that another use case, just as again, you mentioned like a
Oh,
survey,
absolutely.
or, hey, would you be receptive to this, or this is a organizational shift that may be occurring, but we wanted to get your input and value that feedback before we make any final decisions. Do you see that as another use
Yeah.
case within this?
Certainly, and it's thinking about like what are the challenges that exist inside a company, but also we'll see it about like, hey, we're thinking about benefits for the next year. What's really important to you? And there was one company. It was really cool. They saw that there were mentions of wanting more support for wanting to start a family,
Yeah.
and so they factored in, how do we add additional resources for family planning for people on our team that aren't typically available in the your typical benefits package. And it came from feedback. They weren't thinking about it, but they wound up building a plan around it, and that's a huge win for the workforce. So yeah, it really comes down to, what is a company looking to learn, or what problem are they looking to solve? And like, especially right now in trucking, you see a bunch of companies thinking they need to implement technology, but if you implement it without the continuous buy-in of your people, you will meet resistance.
Yes.
And so we certainly see it with companies that are rolling out inward-facing cameras, using feedback, having a dialogue, and being very measured in their approach to reduce the friction that will happen. Because friction will happen when you roll out something like that. But the goal is to try to bring people along as much as possible, and getting their feedback along the way certainly helps with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here again, just my mind starts working. Maybe it's the coffee, Max, but I'm sitting here going, as a technology vendor,
Yeah,
you just summarized a lot of what a lot of folks don't think through, but ultimately becomes the make or break moment of a deployment or technology implementation integration. Is
yeah,
when I go talk to executives in the boardroom, we're talking high level numbers, lowering OpEx, raising profitability, revenue, all sounds
right,
great, right? But often in tech, there's a gap between really getting that message down to the lower levels, and I mean that is mid level management
yeah,
down to the end user, as we say, or operations level. And you nailed it, man. There's this, because they weren't involved in that situation, the earlier discussions, to be able to voice their opinions or their concerns, etc. What you find is, these in tech, it gets mandated effectively,
mhm,
and then there's a resistance, and they're for a lot of reasons. And I think that then you come back 6 months later, the executives go, hey, people aren't really liking your technology, and it's like, are they even using it? And
yeah,
it all ties back in. No one ever got ahead of this to bring them and give them a seat at the table, let
right,
them voice the good, again, good, bad, and ugly concerns, address it, make them feel heard and a part of the
yeah,
conversation, explain the how, the why. This is why we're doing this. And again, shame on tech companies and the leadership at some of these organizations that I work with for not doing a better job of that. And I think it just has this ripple impact across that front line of saying, if they're not going to value us, then, especially when you get into AI and automation. I mean, that was the number two thing, or between one and two, for the longshoremen, right? They want to, yeah,
yeah,
compensation's obviously there, but that they want to be able to say, we feel like automation's a threat to us
yeah.
and our survival. But I think, again, it goes back to, has anyone really gone out there and explained it in more depth to, yeah, there's things that machines may be able to do better, whether it's at a port or at a facility level or even in a truck.
Yeah,
But don't translate that to mean you're getting a pink slip.
right.
It preemptively gets you ahead to say, this is how you fit into the future equation. Here's where you're really good. And here's where we feel like some automation may come in, but that it makes sure it's a better quality of life for you at the workforce. So
Yeah.
I like how you did that. And I would be really intrigued, maybe after this, Max, at some point, to kind of go, how do we leverage a WorkHound tool to kind of take it a step further? And there's still maybe white collar roles, the knowledge workforce, as you mentioned. But I think they have an opinion too. And I think it really, with the technology boom and the software advancements, there's kind of a correlation of, no matter where your functional role is, you want to be heard. So I don't know, maybe something to consider, man, for future references. Technology companies leveraging you to get feedback anonymously, and that, if I'm an executive, I want to know that, right? Because last thing I want is to throw all this cash at these tech projects that ultimately fizzle out. And oftentimes the number one reason is change management was lacking. So something, food for thought, right? If nothing else.
We've got a couple of office staff groups where companies will say, "Hey, this works great for our drivers. It works great for our warehouse. Can we do our staff?" And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for sure. Now the strategy for engaging them is a little bit different, but it
Sure.
can be done because at the end of the day, it's how are we listening to our people? How are we digesting it? And how are we doing something about it?
Right. Right. We can talk about all the things, again, inherently the bias, the just our natural inclinations to always, like I said earlier, right? My steak was undercooked, the server was all like,
Right.
let's switch gears and go to that 30-ish% that you said is good feedback, right?
Yeah.
That reinforces we're doing some. I think every company just wants to hear, Max, like, hey, we know we have room for improvement. Please tell us we're doing some things right, just to
Yeah.
kind of level it off a little bit. Give us some tangible, like, examples of things that you hear the positive side, and how does that start to ripple and create a better culture, perhaps, or surface its way up to leadership to at least give them some acknowledgement that we're not just a dumpster fire doing everything wrong.
So typically, the interesting thing about positive versus negative feedback is that positive feedback is often short and concise, whereas negative feedback is usually two times longer
Yeah.
and very specific. So much that we actually had to create a new theme in our sentiment analysis called praise, just to
Yeah.
isolate those comments that were short, sweet, that recognized the company doing a great job, that didn't neatly fall into any of the other categories out there. But so I would say that one of the biggest themes that stands out for positivity is people. And so it's funny because like it's also one that has a lot of the negative feedback too. But people will recognize when things are going well inside the business. Where a dispatcher, driver manager went above and beyond, or them understanding a situation at home and being flexible with a worker. Just really is like taking care of them and feeling appreciated and respected. Those sorts of things are, I think, that one of the top ones. Oftentimes it'll be appreciating the culture of a company.
Yeah.
So I would say from a positive standpoint, that's where we see a significant amount. But it's often what we encourage companies to do is say, this is your moment to highlight these as testimonials on your website. Like, yes, we
Bingo.
want to fix,
Yeah.
yes, we want to fix things, but here's your gold mine to attract the next roster of people to join your team, uh, and say, don't you want to come to a company where people are experiencing good things like this?
Yeah, you read my mind. I was saying, how do you leverage that and market that as a means of saying it's just don't take our word for it. Listen to our employees, what they have to say, and
Yeah,
highlight those things. And you
yeah,
can, I guess, the organizations, Max, take it a step further and go when we see people getting praised or process or a facility or a driver. Do you correlate that into some time of a reward system? Like, do you see where companies may say, hey, this every 80-90% of everyone at this location seems to be happy, let's reward the leadership and the employees, right? Because that's ultimately what I assume they all strive for.
yeah.
So are you able to kind of take that in that direction, or at least maybe not for you as WorkHound directly, but I'm guessing that leads into some kind of action item. And you mentioned praise.
Mm-hmm.
People like to say thank you for your work and dedication, but whether it's a Starbucks gift card or something else, I think people also like to feel that you took it a step further and actually showed that appreciation in one way or another. You guys,
Yeah.
is that something you're hearing a lot?
Some, like, we certainly emphasize, like, this is an attaboy moment. What are you
Yeah.
doing to recognize these people publicly inside your organization? We've actually started to see some companies tie the word count feedback and even the satisfaction scores to executive compensation.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so that's certainly an incentive there. So we've seen that a couple different ways.
Max, where do you see this? How much more opportunity do you feel like? Where does WorkHound think of, let's go 5 more years down the road, 7 years.
Yeah.
Where's WorkHound at that point in time? And again, there's no crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
But where do you see the next evolution of growth for WorkHound, and what areas haven't you tapped into that you feel like roadmap or future initiatives might take place?
Yeah, so there's a couple different areas. Like, one is that we're proud of our footprint in trucking, and we'll continue to grow there. But also, we have customers in other industries. So
Hmm.
other parts of the supply chain, whether that's warehousing or 3PLs. We even have companies in restaurants and automotive that we have. So to continue to serve that workforce that doesn't necessarily have a voice.
Right.
This year we rolled out the ability to support multiple languages, so that's really
Yep.
important for us, is because a lot of
You
the
bet.
frontline workforce does not speak English as a first
You bet.
language, and we want them to have a voice with a primarily English speaking management team. But in the future, I'd say the big focus for us is how do we continue to help companies understand the feedback that they're getting, tell a story with it, and take action on it. So we're investing a lot in telling that story, using AI to gather more insights to figure out, how can we be even more proactive in what's happening. So we're investing a lot there. And then continuing to expand our footprint in the employment life cycle. So there's all sorts of money dumped into attracting talent, recruiting, but then when somebody joins a team, they're just kind of dropped there, and that's where WorkCount helps fill
Yeah.
the void in that steady state. So we'll continue to expand our footprint in that employment life cycle to help on the onboarding, because we know turnover is highest in the first 90 days. Oftentimes, companies are losing people, but 15% of their hires are boomerangs. They come back because
Right.
the grass really wasn't greener, and supporting that. So I'd say the combination of supporting multiple industries, continuing to tell a story with the data, and expanding our footprint in the employment lifecycle will keep us busy for a while.
And looking back, Max, in retrospect, what's the one or two things that have surprised you most about in this throughout this project? And again, we're approaching 10
Yeah.
years, it sounds like. So and again, one, two things, anything that stands out that you're like, huh, I would assume something completely different, but after doing this for many years now, anything that really just sticks with you is like, I would have never thought that.
I think one of the biggest things for us is that a key for us having a successful partnership is baking the culture of curiosity into an organization. And if we do that, then we have a really great partnership. And so that's been something that we realize, is that we may run into somebody that has a budget and says, hey, help me with retention. It's like, yes, we can start with retention, but we really need leadership buy-in because this is about continuous improvement inside our organization, and change is hard. It's messy and
Yeah.
it takes time, and so we really need buy-in at multiple layers inside the organization. So that's I'd say one of the biggest ahas for us is that you know understanding what are the steps we need to take to help a company create that culture of curiosity.
Inversely, what's the biggest challenge that you've encountered to date that, has been something that really, people say, what keeps you up at night, or
Yeah,
concerns, challenges, it's all, related on some level. What, it's kind of the other side of the coin there.
yeah.
What, can you provide a little context on some of those experiences you've had over the last 9, 10 years?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, like you said at the beginning of this, the you can take feedback as a gift or an insult, and so I would say the biggest challenge for us is running into organizations where their leaders bury their head in the sand and say,
Yeah.
we don't want to hear these things, or that we're not ready to listen, and so part of our challenge and opportunity is to make it more digestible for people to get ready to listen, because the this is a fast moving environment for any organization. It's not going to slow down for you, so we got to figure out how to meet them where they are and bring them in so that they can we can meet them at their capacity to engage.
Max, for those that may be looking to go, hey, I want to learn more, but there's a cost, right? I'm guessing this is not a nonprofit.
What
Um,
do they say? We do this for fun, but not for free.
Not for. I like it. I like it.
Yeah,
Yeah. How does that? Can you give us and maybe some variations there? A lot of variables to consider, but just from the business model, the pricing model for folks that are like, this makes sense, but the inevitable question, like, all right, I got a limited budget. All right, Max, lay it on me, man. What's this going to set me back? Can you give the audience a little bit more context into what that investment looks like in there? And again, there's always
yeah,
your investment up front, long ongoing, but again, I think we've already calculated, namely on the retention side, the ROI that eclipses whatever an initial investment I assume is anyway. But can
right.
you give us what does that structure look like today for those listening?
Yeah, so I think that's the simplest way to think about it is that for almost all companies, you think about the cost to replace one worker, WorkHound costs that or less.
There you go.
So,
One
so if,
worker.
yeah, so if you're retaining one worker a month, WorkHound pays for itself, two, three
Gotcha.
times over.
Gotcha. Well, Max, what's the best? I know we were kind of coming up on the hour here. It's a Friday. I'm guessing you got a few more emails to clean up before you get your weekend started. But for folks that want to learn more, how do they reach you?
Yeah, so my email is just max@workhound.com, so holler at me there. Certainly go visit our website. We have a lot of great stories around how companies are using WorkHound to improve their organizations. If you're just looking to learn what are some things you can try yourselves, we have a lot of great content on our blog. And then I'd recommend following us on LinkedIn, just because we're
You
always
bet.
updating what our team's working on. And we value feedback of what are companies doing out there, because we embrace what we try to preach to others, and we have a culture of curiosity too. So we're always figuring out where can we level up.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned you're in Chattanooga. I will be down in your neck of the woods, I think, for an event up in November hosted by
Yeah,
the Freight Waves crowd. Can I expect to see you there or anywhere else on the road that people may want to come up and make sure they say hello and shake a hand and maybe learn more? Are
yeah,
you
for
guys
sure.
out and about?
Yeah, also I'd love to see you over there, and
Okay.
we'll be at the ATA conference in
Oh,
October.
Nashville. Yeah. Didn't have
Yeah,
to go far, right, this year.
I know it's nice. But yeah, those are the next couple, and then we're always happy to get on the road to go say hi to people.
Awesome. Well, I will be at both of those events. So really looking forward to seeing you, Max. And again, for everybody listening in, I guess it's just my own preference. I am such a feedback kind of guy, and I'll preface that with constructive feedback, right? Like you
Yeah,
said, there's a word that we didn't insert for the PG show here, but complaint fest is not really that's not the intent. So I'm hopeful. I'm glad to. It's human nature, like I said earlier. Humans are interesting creatures, right? And I think that I don't know
and
that it
that's
ever changes.
other people may use a different term for that too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyway, very intrigued by this at a minimum. And Max, thanks again for enlightening me and elaborating on more of what WorkHound's doing. And I'm a huge fan, man. I can't stress enough that if you're not listening, you mentioned earlier, some executives bury their head in the sand, and
Yeah.
hope is not a strategy for it to go away. And I think I hope organizations really, adhere to this idea of you can get ahead of this,
Yeah.
and it's not all bad. And yes, there's always room for improvement. There's a cost if you don't start listening a little more intently to those frontline workers, right? And
Yeah.
again, couldn't have picked a better week to do this with what's turned into a fairly short strike, but you can just see that as a key example of what could happen at any organization when there's a mass exodus. You don't want to be in that position. And this is certainly an avenue to as a preventative measure, and one that you can sustain out by just creating a culture of we care and we listen. So Max, again, thanks for your time today, man. And again, I hope to see you out in Tennessee here in the next, week after next, I think is ATA. It's coming right up. So
come on with it, Chris.
Awesome. Well, again, Max, thanks. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. And we will see you for another episode of Semi-Related here in the near future. Have a great weekend, everybody.